Please start.
So thank you very much for this very generous introduction. So we'll quickly start on our quest for understanding of the HVAC system today. What are we going to cover today in our talk? Basically, we would try to understand why HVAC system is required. We will discuss about what are the factors affecting them, how heat transfer happens. We just covered a bit, not much, just to touch some nuances, and then understand what are the type of air conditioning, explore beyond the conventional method of doing air conditioning, understand what are the factors influencing the HVAC from the building perspective, and see how we can remain sustainable in the current scenario. So this is what I'm trying to discuss today. What my interest would be to complete the presentation in around 45-50 minutes, and then we may have another 20-25 minutes for interaction. So this is where I personally feel more exchange of ideas happen, and we learn a little more from either side. Otherwise, it's just one side discussion, and sometimes the basic purpose of the presentation is lost in a normal routine presentation. Okay, so we'll go ahead, start. First basic requirement of any air conditioning system is to provide comfort. Now, basically in our offices, in our residence, restaurants, bedrooms, we normally put air conditioners. It is just to feel comfortable, to sleep with ease, and not have a high level of precipitation in this environment when the ambient condition is very high. We, in certain scenarios, also need to have humidity control. Data center is one important factor where humidity is very important. Apart from temperature, we also have a very stringent control on humidity. Of course, there are other industries which also require humidity control, like pharmaceutical industry. Then pharma industry and food industry, protection of the product from contamination is also a very important factor. And HVAC plays a very important role in doing that. That is where the clean room design comes into picture. Dust control, I talked about a bit on pharma and this. So electronics and dust are to this. In fact, electronic industry design, semiconductor industry design is much more stringent from dust control from the pharmaceutical perspective. Normally, we have in a pharma, the normal clean room classification is class 100. When I say class 100 is basically 100 particles of 0.3 micron and above in a volume of say 1 cubic feet. When we do electronics industry or semiconductor industry, we recently did one lab where it had to be within 10. So the requirement was much more stringent, and when you're doing semiconductor industry. Microbial control, again, pharma and hospitals are the two important factors. You don't want your system to become a cause of infection. Basically, in hospitals, in current scenario, when you have the pandemic going on with this COVID-19, hospitals sometimes become a major source of cross transmission of this virus, and HVAC plays a very important role in mitigating that risk, or if not done right, it can become a source of contamination. So we do a lot of evacuation strategies, a lot of airflow patterns have to be done when you're doing a containment ward in a particular way, where you don't want the air which has been exhaled by infected patient to go into the other zone. So microbial control comes into impact, which HVAC design has to take into account. Hazardous environment, like when you're doing a research laboratory where you're doing you're using very toxic components and all that, and you don't want that to happen. Unfortunately, Wuhan didn't take care of this, and we are into this pandemic, and we don't want this kind of activity again happening somewhere else. So I think the HVAC design is very important in this kind of facilities. Potent drugs, again, when you have, when I say potent drugs, are drugs which are normally used for hormonal corrections and anti-cancer facilities, which are highly toxic, and normally, even if you inhale or your skin absorbs a small portion of this potent drugs, it can have a very destructive side effect. So again, you have to see to from HVAC design per se, we normally look when we are doing a pharmaceutical facility is how we protect this potent drugs from uh, moving around in other zones, and how we can maintain containment. Of course, other applications, one out-of-box application would be space suits. You cannot design a space suit in a normal way like we do air conditioning here. So as I said, the air conditioning role is just not doing comfort, temperature, and humidity as such. It has much more larger impact when you look at the broader spectrum in which the HVAC system is used. Let us understand what are the factors affecting this HVAC system. One is, of course, we all know ambient conditions. So the air conditioning design, when I'm doing it here in Mumbai, and when I do in Delhi, or I do it in Bangalore, for the same space, same area, same application, the TRs would be different because of the change in ambient condition. Space surrounding the air conditioning. This is again a very important factor. Like you have, let's say you have a small air conditioning unit zone. You want to create an air conditioning zone very close to your furnace area. Then you have to take into account the heat that would be coming through that furnace, radiated through that proximity of the furnace area into your design. Otherwise, you will fail that. Normally, when you have a small control room for this furnace areas, you need to take that into account when you are maintaining its controls in a controlled environment. So surrounding areas need to be factored in. Heat gain from the sun. For the major part of the air conditioning load is the heat gain from the sun. If you look from residential or office premises per se, this forms almost 60 to 70% of your air conditioning heat gain, and it has to be factored in properly to understand to have an effective HVAC design. Occupants, so number of people, and what are they doing in this? So if it's an office premises, somebody is sitting, he may generate a lower heat in output than somebody who is doing a heavy lifting and shifting activity. Or like say somebody, you have a badminton court which you are air conditioning, and if people are playing badminton, the amount of energy that they are going to put in is much higher than what the people doing in office premises. So you have to factor all that in while you're doing the designing, depending upon application and what the people are doing in that zone. Equipments. After transmission gain from the sun, the equipment at most time becomes a major source of heat gain. When I say equipment, it's like your computer is an equipment for an HVAC, from HVAC design per se. It generates a lot of heat, and this has to be removed. Your office has a projector, then that generates a lot of heat, and that has to be taken into account. And from industry perspective, you have equipment, machines which are generating, like in labs, you have a lot of series of equipment. While they are while you're using them, they will generate some heat, because eventually whatever the electric energy you put into your equipment gets converted into the heat energy, and if it remains within the confined space of your air conditioning zone, you need to remove that. So equipment, understanding of that. Main factor while you're doing equipment is to understand what are the diversity factors of this. Normally what happens is we sometimes take the nameplate value or the rated kilowatt value of the equipment in design, but in practical experience that we had, we feel that actual power drawn, the actual energy consumed by this equipment may be much lower than what is rated this, and those rated powers usually come for a very rarely for a very short period of time. Otherwise, it works normally around it between his 60 to 80% of his rated capacity. Depending upon your use, you need to use a proper operating factor or a diversity factor to come at the right value for heat load design. Pressure component, again, there are a lot of standards in this, and pressure has become a very important factor in current scenario, where a lot of guidelines are impressing on bringing in fresh air so that you have dilution and you can reduce your inborn contamination and improve your air quality. Of course, it's all true if your source of fresh air is pristine. But if you have a fresh air you're sucking next from your toilet, you would rather not have this fresh air coming in. So you need to look at the source from where it is coming in, and at many occasions you need to treat this fresh air before you bring into your confined zone, so that it doesn't add to your indoor particle count or a microbial contamination. In a normal, while we are still on the fresh air, normal air conditioning unit, we just ignore this fresh air. We'll talk about this a little more as we talk about the type of air conditioning systems as such. And at times we need to also look into the exhaust and leakages as such. Normally, these are ignored when we do a comfort air conditioning for office and residential premises. This becomes very important when you're doing industrial application, specifically for pharmaceutical and semiconductor industry, where you have to be very sure about any dust generating process within the room has to be exhausted out so that it doesn't contaminate the other area. And all your infiltration or leakages are from a cleaner zone. It doesn't add to the room particle count or HVAC. So again, HVAC system plays a very important role in establishing this proper cascades in maintaining exhaust and leakages. But some of the basically, this is very important when you're doing a cold storage kind of thing, because if you have a product which is germinating, it generates a lot of heat and all that, and you need to factor that into it, maintain the right temperature in your cold storage. And basic, if you look into the cold storage of potato and onion, it's a very important factor, because if the temperatures go up, these products, onion and potatoes start germinating, and then the product is lost and you have to throw it away. So this is where it's very important that you take factor this heat into it, give them the right temperature so that it is maintained in a pristine manner. Of course, temperature and humidity requirement. From comfort per se, we have a chart within which majority of the people, actually initially both, have released that zone within which most of the human feel comfortable, which is a range from say around 18 degrees centigrade to around 25 degrees centigrade, and humidity from say around 40 to 60% RH. But when it comes to industry, the processes sometimes govern the temperature and humidity requirement. Coming from pharma industry, predominantly working there, I can say that there are many products in pharma which are hydroscopic in nature, and they require humidity in a range of less than 25%, and at times temperature less than 18 degrees centigrade. So then we have to factor this into our HVAC design. It may be not too comfortable for the human working in that zone to be working at 18 degree and less than 25% RH, because your skin dries very quickly in this environment. You still have to maintain these conditions just to see that the product is doesn't absorb humidity and you don't lose that product or you don't waste that product. Okay. So if you understand that, let's quickly run later. Before I do that, just I want to do a quick check. Dr. Khoth, am I going too fast? Am I audible? You want
everything is fine, sir. Smoothly going. Okay. Everything is smooth. Please proceed.
Okay. If anybody has any query in between, of because I'm not seeing that, but if they can always raise their voice, and I would like to attend to that, so that we are in the process, we don't mess out any points. Okay. So basically, HVAC system is basically governed by the heat transfer. Normally, all the three methods of heat transfer are active when you do any HVAC air conditioning system: conduction, convection, and radiation. But the major HVAC system works on in the room per se. The cooling happens by convection, where you have a cold air coming around, and when this cold air is in the room, it flows over your body through convection. You feel your body releases the heat to the air, and this is how you feel comfortable. We all know conduction, which is basically the physical transfer of the heat from one end of the material to another end, where the one end is in the source of the heat generation, and another end is on the cooler side. Now, conduction is a heat which normally happens within your heat exchangers, partly when the refrigerants are flowing through one end, and it cools the outer end of the heat exchanger. It cools the fins, which then in turn cools the air passing over the fins. So all the three play an important role, but more importantly, which we understand, we fail to understand, is the major source of the heat transfer in a system is by radiation. And when I say by radiation, is when you have a surrounding temperature above your temperature or the room temperature, the heat transfer happens, which is by the Stephen-Boltzmann's law, and greater the temperature difference, higher is the heat transfer. We all know that, and this is a major source of heat within the room, and we will discuss about this little more detail when we are the sustainable part of our presentation. So basically, we talked about heat transfer. So what is cold? So it's basically lack of heat is defined as cold as such. Otherwise, cold doesn't have any other definition. Okay. Now let us understand, before we move into the little more theoretical part of HVAC design, let us understand what are the basic principles from the psychometric properties of air. From designer's perspective, we need to have at least, there are more properties, but at least 5 properties are very important to understand from the designer's perspective. We all know what is the dry bulb temperature. Basically the temperature or the dry bulb of the air of your thermometer, and on a psychometric chart, it is seen with from this vertical line. If you can see my cursor, this vertical line denotes the dry bulb temperature. So let's say for our case, when our thermometer is showing, a dry bulb of the thermometer is showing 80 degrees Fahrenheit, then we are on this point on the 80 degree line, and when you have a psychometric chart, you need to have know 2 parameters of the air. Any 2 parameters, you can locate your point on a psychometric chart, and then you can evaluate all other parameters. So now that we have the dry bulb temperature, the other easier parameter to measure is the wet bulb temperature. What we mean by wet bulb? In the wet bulb temperature, basically the wick of your thermometer is covered. The bulb of the thermometer is covered with a wick, which is moist by the normal temperature of water. Normal temperature, I mean, it's not cold water or hot water. It's a normal temperature of water. It's moist by the normal temperature of water, and you have to have an air flowing over this bulb. So normally we have a sling cyclometer where you turn it around so that it creates an air movement around the wick of the wet bulb, and this temperature would be normally lower than the dry bulb temperature, and this temperature is denoted by this slant line, which gives us, let's say, for a particular application, we have measured dry bulb of 80 degrees Fahrenheit and a wet bulb of 66. So the intersection of this is happening at here. Now from here on, we can then, from the psychrometric chart, establish all the other properties of the air. So here we can say now the humidity of at this point is 50%. It is between 40 and 60. So we say humidity is 50%. We'll talk a little more on humidity later. I'll come again over there. Then we say that the specific humidity is a moisture contained or actual moisture contained of the air per pound of dry air is given by this line, horizontal line here, 0.011 pounds per vapor per pounds of dry air. And as you go on the right side, when it intersects over here on the saturation curve of the psychrometric chart, you will get the dew point of it. Now, dew point is the point where wherein your dry bulb temperature and your wet bulb temperatures are equal. So at this point, on this point, your dry bulb temperature and your wet bulb temperature would be equal. So here it would be 55% dry bulb and 55% wet bulb. And this point is called as a saturated point. And the dew point has a significance from the point of view of HVAC design, is that beyond this, if you pull the air beyond this dew point, it loses its capacity to hold moisture, and the vapor in the air will condense, which is we call as a condensate. In any HVAC system, you will find that there's a water coming out, even in your not designed room air conditioners or your residential air conditioners, you find that the water coming out. That is because you are cooling your air below its dew point, and air is releasing its excess water at that dew point, and you are draining it out through a tree. Now, while we are on this, let us understand the concept of humidity a little more. Humidity is basically the ratio of the water in the air at that particular point. When we say here it is 50% humid, it is the ratio. That means it is holding 50% of water over its capacity of 100%. That means, let's say we have, I would have, if I had a camera, I think this analogy would be much easier to explain, but I will still make an effort. Again, an apology, my camera is not working. Okay. So let's imagine you have a glass. And this glass of water is half full. This glass of water is, let's say, 80 degree Fahrenheit, and it is half full. So we say at wet bulb, at dry bulb 80 degrees centigrade, 80 degree Fahrenheit, and a wet bulb of 66. The glass of water has 500 grams of water. So we say it is 50% full. So we say humidity is 50%. Now imagine that this glass is such that as you cool, the size of the glass reduces. So when I bring this glass from 80%, 80 degree Fahrenheit to 70 degree temperature, the size of the glass has come down. So I'm losing my cursor in between. Okay, sorry, I got it again. So from here, it has come down to this level. Okay. Okay. So we say that it has come down at this level. So basically, what is happening that this 80-70 degrees, the glass has come down to this point here on 70 degree Fahrenheit. So what has happened here? The size of the glass has reduced. The water contained in the glass has still remained the same, 500 grams. But since the glass has reduced in size, now instead of its earlier volume of say 100,000 ml, it has now become say 70 ml. My water content still remains 0.5 ml, so rather 500 ml from the 1000 ml original volume of the glass. So now the relative fullness of the glass has increased. It has now become almost 70%, which is what you see on this chart. When it moves from here to 70, it has the RH has gone up from 60 to 70%. The specific moisture of the air still remains the same, 0.001. In our case, analogy 500 ml. But since the water glass has reduced, shrunk in size, it has its holding capacity, its holding volume has reduced from 1000 ml earlier to 700 ml now. Its relative humidity or relative fullness has gone up. As we take it further, we cool this further, and we come to almost around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is close to which is almost to its dew point. You will find that the glass is now 100% full. Because the glass has shrunk in size, it is almost come to its 500 ml for holding capacity. So, which is, we call it as its dew point. Mind you, the moisture content still remains the same. 500 ml as in the case of analogy, and if you look at the specific on a psychometric chart, 0.011 pounds per pounds of dry air. Now, what happened? What will happen if I cool this glass any further? It will further shrunk in size. Now that it has further shrunk in size, say when I go down to say 50 degrees Fahrenheit, it has further shrunk in size. So the excess water, it cannot hold the water anymore. The excess water will spill out. Its relative fullness will still be 100%. So when I say from the relative humidity per se, it is still 100% at this 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But the water content, the specific water content has gone down from 0.011 pounds of dry air pounds to 0.008. But the RH the relative humidity has come down, but the relative humidity remains same, the 100%, but its specific humidity has come down from 0.011 value to 0.008. Now what happens? Now let's say we again reheat this air from 50 degrees Fahrenheit to my 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So when it comes back to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, now the RH relative humidity has come down from its original value of say 50% to its relative value of less than say around 37-38%, which is below the 40% RH. If you see the saturation curve here, so we are somewhere here, it is around 37%, and the RH has, specific humidity has come down to 0.08. So this is what is actually the relative humidity. It's relative to that particular temperature. That is why it is called as a relative humidity. It is relative to that particular dry bulb temperature. As the dry bulb temperature changes, for the same moisture contained in the air, its relative humidity will change. It will increase if you reduce the temperature. So that means it is more saturated, so it can hold lesser amount of moisture, and it will reduce as the temperature increases. That means it can hold more amount of water as the temperature goes up. Hope I made a decent effort in explaining the relative humidity, and I would like to take some questions over here if there are any, or we will go ahead. This will also give me some time to sip some water.
Great. Can I ask you a question?
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much for your efforts in explaining. I just wanted to understand from you once again. You said when the temperature dry bulb reduces, the capability of the air to absorb more water is increasing. Can you please explain once again? Is my understanding correct?
A bit. Let me rephrase this.
Yeah, please, because I may not have understood correctly.
So basically, what? Let us first make a statement and then see how it happens over here.
Yeah.
The moisture holding capacity of the air reduces with reduction in temperature.
Correct.
Moisture holding capacity of the air increases with increase in temperature.
Yes.
This is called as a relative humidity. So let's say when I'm saying my air is at 50% relative humidity, that means if it can hold X amount of water, let's go to, let's look from the segment chart. Let's say this 80 degree Fahrenheit air, if I go straight up to my saturation point over here, then we would be somewhere around 0.22 value of specific humidity, that is pound of water vapor towards the pound of dry air. Now, it is actually 50% of the actual capacity that we measured. When we measured at 66 degree wet bulb and 80 degree dry bulb, what we measured was 0.0011. So that is where we said that the humidity it is falling between 40 and 60 line of the saturation of the relative humidity curve. So we say the relative humidity is 50%. So that means at 80 degree Fahrenheit, the maximum amount of water vapor that air can hold in pounds of water vapor per pound of dry air is 0.22 value. Currently, it is holding 0.001. So you divide 0.001 by 0.002. So you get a value ratio of 50%, which is its relative humidity.
Yeah.
Now, as we go to a temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, if you see that, and you take the saturation level over here, it can only hold 0.016 pounds of dry vapor over pound of dry air. So as we have reduced the temperature, its holding capacity of vapor has reduced.
Okay, understood.
Am I making sense now?
Yeah, I understood. I got it wrongly when you first told, but now I'm clear. I've understood. Thanks.
So that is why when we say relative humidity, when you need to mention a relative humidity, it has always to be associated with its dry bulb temperature.
Yes, yes.
Relative humidity in itself has no meaning unless you know its dry bulb temperature. I can say relative humidity is 100%, but I will never know 100% which temperature, what is this other property, unless I know the dry bulb of it.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So, with your permission, I move ahead.
Yes, sir. Please. Thanks.
So let us understand the type of air conditioning. I think we understood what are the properties of air, why air conditioning, and all that. How the air conditioning happens through the modes of heat transfer. Now let us understand the various type of air conditioning. The predominant type of air conditioning which we commonly use is vapor compression system. We'll discuss this in a little more detail in a few slides ahead. Other option is vapor absorption. Vapor absorption is in vapor compression. The governing the compressor, the heat of the compressor is what governs the electrical power governs the circuit and the heat transfer mode. In vapor absorption, the heat energy is what is predominantly used for generating the refrigerant effect. We'll again discuss this in a little more depth. Okay, and we all know evaporative cooling. I will briefly touch that. Indirect and direct evaporative cooling is an extension of the evaporative cooling. I will explain this. This is indirect version is a relatively newer concept, but many of our audience may be already aware of it, because when I say newer, it's still almost around in practice from last 8 to 10 years, or I would say at least 8 years. Ventilation, I'll just briefly mention, will not discuss in much. When we say ventilation, is like our fan in a room is a ventilation method. It gives us some comfort, and it can be a mode of air conditioning. Steam humidification, again, I am not going to discuss this much over here, but steam humidification plays an active role for an application in a textile industry, where apart from temperature, you also need to maintain very high level of humidity so that you have a yarn which is moist and tensile. When you add moisture, it becomes tensile and it doesn't break. While we are on this, I'll just share one application we did almost around 15 years ago. We all know this sutures we use for medical purpose. When we have a cut and we need to seal this, we tight the suture. We had an opportunity of doing some work for Johnson & Johnson, which is a leading manufacturer of sutures. It sounded like a little ugly for some of our audience here, but these sutures are made from catgut. That is the cut of either the goat or any other animal of a similar kind. So they get this from abattoir. They get this catgut from there. Of course, now for the benefit of some other audiences who are purely vegetarian, you have synthetic sutures also available now. So don't please worry about that. It's just for clarification. So normally in those times, they used to have it from a catgut. But then when you bring it, they would, they had a large hall, almost around 60 feet in length, and they would tie this catgut on either end of a wooden plank, and they would stretch it. Now, when you do stretch it, it had to be highly moist, so that it's very tensile and doesn't break. So this room had to be air conditioned to have a humidity of almost around 100%, where they were, tying this catgut on either end of the wooden plank of a room which is almost 60 feet in length. And then once this is done, they have tied on either end, and it is in a good amount of tensile. Then they would like to have the humidity brought down from say 90% to 95% to say around 45 to 50% in a span of 8 hours. Again, they didn't want to happen this any faster or any slower, so that if you do it any faster, there was a chances of this catgut breaking in between, because it would lose its tenacity, and it would just snap in between. So their study showed that if you do it gradually in a span of 8 hours, they would get uniform moisture removal, and it will not break. And then they needed this to hold up for another 8 hours, between 40 to 45. So this is again a unique application I had opportunity to work on, and it gave me a lot of insight on how the system air conditioning system works. So basically, the point here is that we all learn from this unique applications, and it gives us a lot of understanding of how the things happen. And I was fortunate enough in my formative years to have this kind of application done. Okay, so this is another application where you need to add humidity in your HVAC system so that your product is stable. Okay. Desiccant system, of course, this is used for removing RH. But this is normally used for removing RH, which you cannot remove by condensation, by a chilling system, which has a limitation of freezing below the 0 point. So for any system which requires moisture removal below the 0 degree centigrade, where the water will freeze and one will block the HVAC system itself, desiccant systems are put in. These are basically a chemical system which remove water by absorption, and then this absorbed moisture is removed by heat energy. Again, I'm not covering much over here because it's a specific application. Heaters is another way. Of course, we don't use it much, but if there are any participants from Northern India, they will be using these heaters as a mode of air conditioning very regularly in the winter months. Earth air tube, we will discuss this a little more in detail as we go further as a part of our sustainable strategy. So I'll talk more about that. Again, I will cover ground source heat pump little in more detail as for sustainable per se, and non-conventional method of air conditioning. Basically, sometimes we use compressed air as a method of air conditioning. When I say basically for the space suits, or I would not say space suits, but for pharmaceutical application, when you are doing a potent facility, and you want to protect the person from exposure from the product which has been made in the room, we give him a complete PPE suit, which is with a breathing apparatus, and the source of this breathing apparatus is a compressed air. And when you release this compressed air, it also gives you cooling, because when it comes when the compressed air is released into a large opening, it reduces temperature and forms as a way of air conditioning. So it serves two purposes. It becomes a source of oxygen for them, and also gives them some cooling. Of course, there are other applications like Peltier chip and all that, which are also non-conventional method of air conditioning, which we are not discussing here in this short webinar that we have. So let's go to the core of any vapor compression system, which is I would say 80% of our air conditioning happens with this method of air conditioning. It has 4 critical components. One is the evaporator, where the cooling happens; compressor, where the vapor is. So evaporator, we have the liquid refrigerant coming to the evaporator. It absorbs the heat from the room, from the air flowing over the evaporator, and it becomes a vapor. This vapor comes into the suction of the compressor, where this low temperature vapor is compressed. It increases pressure, and as pressure increases, its temperature also increases. So high pressure, high temperature vapor comes into condenser. Normally for F22 circuit, the discharge temperature from the compressor is somewhere in the range of around 55 degrees centigrade. As it comes into the condenser, we have an ambient air flowing. If it's an air-cooled system, or if it's a cooling tower, we have a water flowing through the tubes to cool this refrigerant. As it comes to the almost ambient temperature of, in a water-cooled case, around 35, around 38, 40 degrees centigrade. If you have an ambient of around 35 degrees centigrade, this high pressure, high temperature refrigerant condenses and becomes liquid at high pressure, but it's now in a liquid form, because the basic property of this refrigerant is when it reduces its temperature, it condenses and forms a liquid. This liquid, which is at a high pressure but in a liquid form, it is released to an expansion valve in a restricted manner. And as it comes out of the expansion valve, it expands, and where it loses its the liquid loses its heat and forms a vapor. Part of the liquid expands, and this heat of expansion, I would rather not heat. The energy for expansion cools the refrigerant coming in, and which in turn cools the air. This liquid coming in then cools the air. Now this analogy is similar to somebody who is from Mumbai. If you come out of a local train, how relief you feel. The refrigerant coming off the expansion would be going to the same relief over here, where you are crowded train, and when as you come out on a platform, when your stop comes, you feel the relief. The same kind of feeling would be this evaporator happens to the refrigerant as it comes out of the expansion device, and the cycle continues. Okay. So there are this vapor control system has multiple ways of using it. All these 4 components are there in your window air conditioner, where you have an evaporator on the cooling side, on the room side. You have a condenser on the outdoor side. You have its condenser fan, which sucks the air from the side. You have a louvers from the side, which sucks the air in, and then passes through the condenser fan over the condenser coil and then discharges the hot air out, which cools your refrigerant. This you have a capillary normally inside this, tucked somewhere inside, which acts as your expansion device, and then it comes into your condenser coil, which would be somewhere here behind this front grill, where the air flows through the front grill, goes over the evaporator coil, and then through the blower passes comes out through the discharge lever. And you have a thermostat to control the speed of the fan, to speed up the amount of pressure flowing through the system. And this is how you control your HVAC air conditioner room through a window air conditioner. The good part of any window air conditioner is that it has normally a flap on the side, which is here, which when open can bring in some fresh air from outside. And I personally feel it's a healthy scenario when you have a room which is normally closed for 8 hours. When you, let's say you put this unit in your bedroom and your doors are going to be remain closed for 8 hours of night time, you may not have any pressure coming in. So if you have this flap open, it will bring in some fresh air and maintain some ventilation. So this is a good part of any window unit. But normally, in my experience, I've seen that this flap is the first thing which is cuts off when you have a cooling problem. In your mechanic comes and closes flap air. So you may have a flap, you may have a switch, but the flap, the link to the flap is broken and it will not operate. So we need to take care of this while we are getting it, inspected by the maintenance person. Then we have the split air conditioner. The window air conditioning was broken into two parts, and this is how we got the split air conditioner. I remember in my early formative years, it was a challenge to have a room which doesn't have an outside window air condition, because we only used to get a window air conditioner. And basically, the parent company which I was working for developed a ducted system wherein you can take an air from your window air conditioner and then distribute throughout the other areas and then bring it back, and did a lot of good business because there was limitation of specifically in Bombay, you have one window and then you have long room. How do you air condition a complete set of cabins which are further down the line? But when the split air conditioner came, it all changed because it gave us a lot of flexibility in locating the condensing unit, which had to discharge air out. So now the evaporator section, basically the line drawn here is what this is your condenser section and this is your evaporator section, which is segregated. I would rather say it is here. It should be crossed like this, diagonal like this, because the compressor normally goes with the condenser and expansion valve is towards the evaporator side. Okay, so what we have here, we have the condenser and the compressor which is outside this. The good part of this system was the noise of the compressor and the fan, condenser fan are remotely located, so this became much more silent. We could now increase the width of the indoor unit, so it improved the heat transfer surface area, and with that we could reduce the airflow requirements and the speed of the fan requirements, so that we could make this unit more silent and and more elegant to look as such. Now we have, of course, multiple models in the indoor unit available, which can go with the interior layout of your facility. You have high wall mounted units in here, you have cassette units, you have floor mounted units and all that. All these units have a common point. You need to have a drain connection to this unit, so that whatever condensate which by virtue of cooling will happen has to be drained out. Okay, and then you have two pipes coming in from your condenser. One is the liquid line coming in over here, and the other one is the suction line going back to the compressor. So this has to be connected. So the drain requires, normally it is done through gravity, unless we have a cassette unit where you have a pump, so it doesn't require gravity as such. The limitation of this kind of arrangement was that with this system that you have one indoor unit and one outdoor unit. So if you have a series of cabins connected and you have one location where you can locate your outdoor unit, you'd have to put multiple outdoor units over here. But when VRF came, all this changed. It gave us a lot of flexibility, wherein with one outdoor unit you can connect your multiple indoor units. Here, of course, I've just shown cassette units, but there's no limitation to that. You can connect cassette units or floor mounted units or high wall mounted units or ductable units, depending upon your application. And other important part of this VRF unit was that it gave you a lot of distances. You can go vertical distances as well as your horizontal distances were large, which in a conventional split unit we would limit it to the manufacturer recommendation of 15 meters, but then definitely not more than 20-25 meters. Otherwise, you had a serious problem of oil retention and all that in your evaporator, and compressor failure problems would increase over there. All those problems were alleviated when, or eliminated rather, sorry, when we had the VRF system, because these are designed for having the condenser unit put on a terrace, and you can have a vertical height of almost around 60-70 meters, and you can have a horizontal distance of excess of 100-120 meters. Okay, so this takes care of our compression system. Okay. Now let's move to the vapor absorption system. As I mentioned earlier, vapor absorption system, the governing cycle is governed by the heat energy. In vapor compression, the electrical energy which runs the compressor is a major source of energy. Here, the source of energy is heat energy. Let us understand how this happens. Let us start from the condenser. Let us right now assume that the liquid refrigerant comes into condenser. As it loses its condenser, here it is again cooled through a heat exchanger, normally a cooling tower, and it forms a low temperature liquid. Comes through the expansion valve. Again, the same the philosophy remains the same. Through the expansion valve, when it comes out, the part of the evaporated liquid cools the liquid further down, and as it comes into the evaporator, it absorbs the heat either from cooling water, if it's a chiller-based system, or a DX or an air-based system. It will impart, it will absorb the heat from the air or a chiller, and it will form the vapor. Now, let's say here we are talking about water and ammonia cycle. So the ammonia is a refrigerant here in our case, and water is a absorber. As this ammonia vapor, liquid ammonia came into the evaporator, absorbed the heat of evaporation, cooled the water in the vapor absorption chiller. As this ammonia liquid became vapor, as this rises and becomes vapor and comes into the absorber. When it comes in the absorber has a weak solution of water coming in. When I say weak solution, weak in a sense of amount of concentration of ammonia present in it. As it comes over here, this weak ammonia water solution absorbs the vapor coming in from the evaporator. As it starts absorbing the vapor, it becomes a strong solution, and this strong solution is pumped through a heat exchanger. Then heat is added over here. And in the evaporator, we want the temperature as low as possible, absorber as possible, close to ambient, so that it can absorb maximum amount of water, ammonia. As it goes through the evaporator, through the absorber, it comes through the exchanger. We want to raise its temperature so that it can come to the generator at the highest temperature possible. In the generator, the further the temperature is enhanced, wherein it reaches a saturation temperature, where the strong solution of ammonia and water, the ammonia is released, which is then passes through the rectifier, where the water, if any vapor of water is there, it is removed out, and it comes into the condenser. Again, further cooling happens in the condenser through a cooling tower, where it comes close to its wet bulb temperature, and as it comes through the condenser, the liquid ammonia is then expanded in the evaporator, and then the cycle continues. So the absorber cycle is over here. The water cycle happens through between the generator and the absorber, and the ammonia cycle happens from the evaporator, absorber, generator, and condenser. So this is how the vapor absorption works in a broad scale. This system is very effective in a scenario where you have a lot of waste energy available. The COP of this is almost 3 times more. It requires 3 times more energy than any vapor combustion system, because it's not very efficient in that sense. But if you have a waste heat available, like you already have a solar energy and you're dumping that energy out somewhere, you can use that for heating the solution here in the generator, and also in the heat transfer here. And then you have a cooling tower. You need a cooling tower to reject the heat out. It will become much more efficient, because you're not paying for this energy. Moving towards the evaporative cooling, I think we all know this. I will just briefly touch. It's a simple strategy where you use in a dry and hot environment, basically where your dry bulb temperatures are very high and your wet bulb temperatures are very low. So the moisture content in the air is very low, and when you pass it through a pan wherein the water is sprayed over it, and is basically normally most of these are counter flow, cross flow heat exchangers. It absorbs the water, and by adiabatic process, it increases the moisture level of the air, and it reduces its dry bulb temperature. So air coming out of this pad is cold and moist relatively. So let's say if you have anything in Delhi in a current scenario, it would be somewhere around 40+ degrees centigrade, and its humidity would be somewhere around less than 30%. To add some amount of water into it, this will cool the air down to say somewhere around say 30 to 30 degrees centigrade, so around 7-degree drop in temperature, but your humidity will go from around 55 to 60% RH. So this is still not too hot, too humid, but your temperature has gone down significantly, and then this air, if you pump into your ventilated space, will give you some relief instead of having 40-degree air moving in the zone. This technology is further elaborated in a direct indirect evaporator system. This is used where basically the only indirect part of the system is used where you don't want to add your moisture to the system. What happens in this indirect system is you have a heat exchanger, basically a cross flow plate kind of heat exchanger, wherein you have an incoming air which is not mixed with the exhaust air. They are moving through different channels. Have air moving in over here laterally, and then you have an exhaust air which is going through a different channel, which is adiabatically saturated to almost 100%. So it is almost close to its saturation temperature dew point. So let's take an example over here. Let's say we have a 40-degree air coming in from here, which has to go further into our room for conditioning, and we have an exhaust air stream coming in at 40 degrees centigrade. This exhaust air is indirect heat exchanger is cooled to almost its dew point, say around say almost around 25 degrees centigrade would be a well bed temperature in a current scenario. This 25 degree air, then when it's cooled to saturation temperature 25 degree air is used to cool this 40 degree air coming in. Normally, the efficiency of this heat exchanger is around 60%. So we have a temperature difference of around say 40 to 25, so almost around 50 degrees centigrade. So you have almost around 7-degree drop in temperature, and so 40 degree air will coming out of the heat exchanger would be around 30 degrees centigrade. Now 30 degrees centigrade almost around say without adding a moisture, there is no humidity added, so it would still be around dry at around 40-45% humidity level. And it can be further cooled by direct evaporative system or by supplementary cooling coil or any other method. So this works very well as a supplementary system for a treated air fresh, treated fresh air unit. Reducing this, I had the opportunity of using this on a multiple occasions for some of my projects where for a technical floor where on a pharmaceutical area, we needed somewhere around almost around 20,000 CFM air coming in. So for a facility in Indore, we use this 10,000 CFM indirect system. We didn't use the secondary part of it, direct system. And normally I would have 40 degree air to come in. So we use this indirect system. We got around 35 in a peak summer. We got around 33 to 35 degree air coming in. So I could reduce my load on the individual system where they would have 40 degree air coming. Instead of that, we have now 35 degree air coming in. So we could reduce that load by 5 degrees centigrade. Okay. I would like to take a bit of a break here just to moist my lungs.
Meanwhile, I like to ask some clarification. Is it okay?
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay. Can you please go back to the previous slide? Sorry, you can take a break for water. I'm very sorry. I'm asking you in this.
No problem. My pleasure. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. The component number 4, it says sensible heat exchanger for cooling without adding water.
Yes.
What is this heat exchanger? Say input air is, let us say, used at 50 degrees centigrade or 40 degrees centigrade, let's say. What is this type of sensible heat exchanger without adding water?
Okay. So basically, this heat exchanger has 2 channels. One is for the air coming in from the T side, and it has another channel wherein the air goes through from the bottom, it rises above. 6 component, which is the exhaust air going up, and this channel is where you are adding moisture. So it's like a plate exchanger where are two parallel things. In one channel you are adding moisture alternatively, and other section is for the incoming fresh air coming in, and alternatively the next section would be with the exhaust air going through. So there are a series of plate heat exchangers in which alternatively the room air, which fresh air which is coming in, which you want to put it in the room, is going through, and in the next section you will be having the exhaust air. This exhaust air is treated evaporatively. It is added moisture and
understood. I understand.
Not to the saturation level. And now this air, which would be at around 25 degrees centigrade, will have a sensible heat exchanger with this 3 air, which is at around 40 degrees centigrade. I have a video, but it had a specific brand name to it. I can show it at the end of this, which will give you more detailed understanding. But since I didn't want to promote any specific brand, I didn't show it over here. But it will give you more clarity. We will do it once this. But basically, this is you understand in this heat exchanger there are 2 channels. One for the fresh air coming in, which we want to put in the room, and other for the exhaust air. This exhaust air is first evaporatively saturated, and So it comes to its wet bulb temperature, which would be in, let's say for an ambient condition like Delhi would be around 25 in today's scenario. So this 25 and 40, we have 15 degree delta T. This is what sensible heat transfer happens in this heat exchanger here.
The sensible heat exchanger, is it through water tubes, a closed circuit water tube?
These are cellulose pad which doesn't allow the moisture transfer to happen. These are patented technology which most of these manufacturers import. Nobody manufactures here in India. There are 3-4 companies doing this, but they are all importing it from US and Europe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I will.
So it is not like the conventional pad. It is not a conventional cellulose pad. It is a different media. It doesn't allow the moisture transfer to happen, but it only allows the heat transfer to happen between the exhaust air stream and the supply air stream.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to, lastly, you please put the video. I will understand it better also.
I will do that surely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now we talked about earth air tube in the initial this type of air conditioning. So this is one of the non-conventional methods of doing. Let me see how already 3:30. How much time do I have? Hello.
Sir, you can continue, sir.
Yes,
please.
I need to move a little fast, I presume. I'm sorry. Okay. Because, okay, so we'll move a little fast because I think I took a lot of my time. I'm sorry. So earth air tube is a simple thing. It works on simple philosophy. The philosophy is that below 6 meters of your ground level, your earth temperature remains steady throughout the year. It doesn't change with your ambient condition. Like, let's say you have a climate of Delhi or something where you have a very cold winter and very hot summer. Let's say you have 3 degrees in winter and you have around 40 degrees in summer. You have a huge temperature difference. The temperature of this in this locale, such kind of ambient condition would be 6 meters below them would be an average of this. So 30 and 40, 37, so almost around 20 to 18 degrees centigrade. So the strategy is to use this cold earth surface to cool this. So you have a 2 kind of system working over here. One is a closed system, wherein you take the room air, pass it through the tube, which is 6 meters below your earth surface, so it is in contact with the cold air surface, and it comes the other end. The air comes out cool, and then it can give you a good amount of air conditioning impact. Other way of using it is an open circuit where you have a fresh air coming in, goes through, you filter this air to a reasonable level, pass it through the earth air tube. Here it comes in contact with around 20 to 18 degree earth surface, loses its temperature, and a cold treated air can come into the system. Now you can use this method in a conjection way. When you use it in an open loop system, it adds to your indoor air quality. You can add a lot of fresh air to the system without adding too much of air conditioning load, and it can then use in conjunction like how we use an indirect evaporator system. This is another strategy of using it. So you can add a cooling coil further to it to reduce, further treat it and take it down. Also, heat pump is a similar application, but it doesn't directly cool the air, but it cools it becomes a source of your heat rejection. Like you normally have a cooling tower for heat rejection, or you have air cool system for the heat rejection. In GRAD4 heat pump, you have a bore wells where you bury the pipes and the heat of condensation, which you normally use for any vapor compression system, is transferred over here. So you don't need any water or anything for heat rejection. And again, it works on the same philosophy that the earth below 6 meters, the undisturbed earth temperature remains steady, and wherein you can reject this heat out. But of course, you need to have multiple such boreholes and bury this pipe down, because over a period of time, you will find that the surrounding temperature of this boreholes will, increase, and it will not be as effective. That is why you need, normally if I have to do it, we make it, we add almost 3 times more boreholes than a general requirement. This just to make it effective for a long period of time. Okay, so we'll now quickly understand how the space is air conditioned. We understood how the vapor control system happens and how the heat transfer happens in the system. So let's say we have this evaporator coil. So the air from the room, from the return duct, comes into the system. We'll talk a little more on the return air fan later on. It comes through the system, comes to by isolation damper in case you want the return air to come in or exhaust air to go out. You have this bypass damper. So normally in a resurface system, you have air coming in, and then it goes through the cooling coil. Here you also have some pressure coming in, so you decide the component of pressure you want, and you throttle this damper so that the right amount of pressure comes in. Normally you have a filter over here too, and this mixing of the return air from the room and your pressure goes through the coil, gets cooled. The supply fan pushes into the room. It takes away the room heat which is coming from your solar, from the person and the laptop that you are having, and it absorbs this heat, and the cycle continues. Normally, in certain scenarios, when you have a very favorable ambient condition, this can happen in a basically what you get a place like Ooty, or you have one Manali and all that. Apart from 3 months, your ambient conditions are very favorable. But if you have an enclosed space, you still need some circulation. So you can have the system working in a 1:2 mode, where you just bring in the fresh air, you filter it. You may not need your air conditioning system because it is normally quite decent enough, around 20 degrees centigrade, and then you circulate this back, and exhaust air is then through exhaust air you put it back out. Or you can control your amount of ventilation rate. You may have 30% air coming in and 70% evacuated out, depending upon your strategy. Not adding too much load on your system. And you can have a water cool system. So the chiller coil, chiller cools the system. The chill water is going through the pump, and you have chiller, and then in turn the chiller rejects the heat to the cooling tower. We discussed this a bit in earlier scenario. The same application here we have the air cool system rejecting the heat out. So, and then you have a room temperature to control the amount of heat and the speed of the fan and all that, to control the amount of heat exchange that is happening in the room. Going further, let us understand what are the factors we need to consider while from a building design perspective. So you have building orientation. So if you have in our scenario, tropical climate, if you have a building facing east-west, you will have a good amount of transmission gain from it. Okay, so you normally avoid building orientation east-west in our. You normally want to have a building facing northwest, so that north-south, so that your amount of heat gain from the transmission is limited. Sun path analysis, basically this is done from an understanding of, again, how the sun will affect the building heat gains. Climate perspective architecture, like normally we have a fad of lot of glasses and all that. It works well for a European climate where they don't have sun, and they want the outside heat to come in whenever the sun is available, that heat to come in, and they normally go with double glazed windows, so that it is insulated, so when they need heating, the heat doesn't go out. But this kind of architecture may not work very well with our kind of scenario, where we have a lot of sun, a lot of heat coming in, and when you have a glass facade and all that, a lot of heat comes in. So from my perspective, this is not a design for our kind of application. Of course, I have to work under an architect, so I will not reserve my comment over here. I hope there are no architects here. Otherwise, I lose some business.
Relax, nobody's there.
Okay. Fenestration is normally what we do, kind of you have an overhang above the window and all that. It plays a very important role in building HVAC because it blocks a lot of heat coming in. In earlier design, you could find that a lot of chajjas and all that were there just for this purpose. They had, I think they had more detailed understanding of architecture than we have it now. Comments reserved again. Building air tightness. You don't want your buildings to breathe. You don't. If you're pulling the air, you don't want this air to leak out, or you're heating it. You don't want this heat to go out, and you don't want unfiltered air coming in. So building air tightness plays a very important role. Of course, in certain scenarios, like in when you have a ventilated building, you don't want your building to be airtight. You want your building to breathe. You want your air to flow through. You want to have a cross ventilation. So in certain scenarios, it works well. So you need to understand whether what air tightness you want to give, depending upon your application, kind of thing. Natural ventilation, again, this is what I talked about when you have naturally you have a cross ventilation and all that. It can help. Unfortunately, the older buildings use a lot of natural ventilation very well. In today's scenario, we are losing it. Hopefully, the generation to come will realize its importance and will go back to what we used to do. We reinvent the wheel on this side. Shading, I talked about it. We need to have a lot of plantation around the building so that we can avoid the direct heat coming in. Material of construction. Again, the kind of construction. If you we'll talk a little more detail as we go further up from sustainable perspective, but we need to have a construction material which is not allowing, which has a high resistivity to heat, so it doesn't allow the heat to come through inside. Specifically in our kind of climate where there's a lot of sun heat coming in, and we need to understand the utility space and planning requirement. I think this is the least thing that is taken into consideration while building design, because HVAC is normally an afterthought after the building, the space is done. Then we say, okay, isko air conditioning karna hai. Abhi kahan lagayenge? Where to put an air conditioner? Then you find a niche somewhere which has limited access and unrealistic way of maintenance, and unfortunately this becomes our concern and basically a problem in long-term management of the HVAC system for that zone. So we should be very clear about how we want, what planning we need, how much space we need for HVAC, both for indoor and outdoor units, so that it can be done right. And of course, we need to look at a little bit of innovation. So lastly, I have to say that this building needs to be engineered. It's not you need to give all this parameter thought and work out a good solution. So now we'll come to a core theme of this: how to remain sustainable. So one thing is reduce the load. If I have done a heat load calculation and I say that I require 1.5 ton of air conditioning load in this area, the first thing as a designer, which can be counterproductive to the business, would be to see how I can reduce this load. At times, it can, while doing this activity, I might reduce my fees also. So anyway, so the first thing that we need to do from sustainable per se is to look at the avenues of reducing this load. Once you have found out what are the source of energy coming in, we need to look into how we can reduce it. Improve the energy efficiency, so we select equipment which are highly efficient. Look at the avenues of low energy heat removal. So we sometimes need to break up the heat loads into different avenues and see how we can use different strategies for removing different heat load. And use of renewable energy as a source for heat transfer, so that we don't use costly electrical energy for this. Of course, one thing I need not to say is we need to stop the waste. So where is the waste coming from? Have you ever imagined that, let's say if the two people are sitting in the room, and at a night time when there is no sun coming in, there is no other source of heat except one your some small light or some fan operating, what would be the source of energy that is that room is generating? A person's metabolic energy heat will not be more than 300 watts. So if there are two people in the room, it's under 600 watt. If I'm putting around 1 ton of air conditioner, which is almost around 3,400 watts, and ideally, when you have such a high air conditioning system, which is removing such a high amount of energy from the room, where the heat input is only 600 watts, we would imagine that this energy, this air conditioning system has to hardly run. But this doesn't happen. We find that our air conditioning system runs continuously. Why? Because we are not just cooling the room, we are also cooling the wall. Have you ever noticed that if you have a sunlit wall, even at night at 10 p.m., you will find that that wall is warm. It is still hot. And it is putting in the energy in the room, apart from the people over there. And this is what you are cooling. In turn, you are cooling this wall, which is in line, which is synced with the floor above and the floor below. So you are also cooling your slabs, your floor above, and then your neighbor's room also. So this is where your energy goes. And that is why you need your air conditioning to work continuously, removing, because that wall has become a heat sink. It is drawing heat from all sides, and which is what it needs to cool. And that is why your air conditioning system continuously works. So basically, this wall is getting the heat from the solar energy. And as I told you, we are also cooling the structure above and below your neighbors. This. So let us understand how this happened in the earlier time. If you have seen, if you have been to Taj Mahal or Gol Gumbaz or any other ancestral building, you will find that those buildings were still cool. In summer, you will still find that those buildings were not getting too hot. So what they did, they used 3 technologies, very simple technologies which didn't cost any energy to them. One was to build barriers against sunlight, have a very large, huge mass. They have a very thick walls and all that, which would reduce the heat coming in. If you have an outer surface area of 40 degrees centigrade, your inner is still low, less than around 30 degrees centigrade. Do not go to that high level because of large thermal mass, and then to radiate the heat out. Now these are the buildings which maintain their cool even in peak summer. You will, if you go inside, I'm sure people who have been to Taj Mahal will, in summer they will see that Taj Mahal is still cool in winter. It doesn't get hot. And let us understand how this happens. So basically, sun has 8 hours to bring in energy, and we have to see if you have a thin wall, it will absorb the heat more. Though it is absorbing the same, sorry, I'll correct here. Though it will absorb the heat, same amount of heat, both heat wall, the thin wall and the cold wall, the inner temperature of the thin wall will be much higher than the higher thermal mass, or a larger, thicker wall. Now, if you see Taj Mahal or Gol Gumbaz or any other structure, old structure, they have a huge almost around 600 mm thick wall. So you have, it has a huge thermal mass for the sun put in the energy. Unlike our 4-inch brick wall, which has hardly any mass to it. So we need to add a barrier to this. I'll skip this and we'll discuss this in a little more detail in a further slide. So basic key thing is that our body temperature is somewhere around, skin temperature somewhere around 34 degrees centigrade to around 36 degrees centigrade. As long as we have a surrounding temperature which is lower than this 34 degrees centigrade, we will feel comfortable. Why? Because when we are at the surrounding temperature is lower than our body temperature, we will be radiating heat to the surrounding. Unlike the scenario where my surface temperature is higher than my body temperature, the surrounding is going to radiate heat to me. So I'm going to absorb heat and my body will struggle in dissipating the heat itself. But if the surrounding temperature is below 34 degrees centigrade, the easiest way for the body to keep it cool is by radiating heat to the surrounding, which is one of the major way of feeling cool, and it's a more uniform way of feeling cool. In that sense, you will feel comfortable. I don't know if somebody has been to a cave or something, you would have noticed that caves are always cooler, and you feel cool in the cave, but there's no air conditioning over there. That is because the cave temperatures are much lower because there is a huge mass. Sometimes there's water and all that happening to the evaporation from the soil and all that. So it always remains cool below the skin temperature, and this is why you feel comfortable. So we need to establish this natural phenomena, heritage technologies, and see how we can bring our structure below 34 degrees centigrade, so that we can remain, we can radiate heat by, we maintain our comfort level by radiating and not by convection or convection. And this is where the best human comfort will come from. So basically, in our heritage structure, they used to add a mass to it. Now, in today's scenario, we cannot add mass. We cannot have such a large 600 mm. No builder will like. He will lose his FSI or say carpet area, and he loses project value. So he will like to have a maximum, as thin as possible, so that he can have a maximum carpet area and larger sellable floor plate. How we can create this virtual mass? So what we did in one of the project was that this was done when I was working for a company called Pan-Asia. We on a roof of a slab, before it was yet it was under construction, before it was done waterproofing, we buried a series of pipe, and this series of pipe were then connected to a small heat exchanger. You can see this is a copper tube. Now we have graduated more. We don't need copper anymore. Even a PVC pipe works very well. This is before the waterproofing. When the slab was under the building was the construction, we buried this pipe, and then we let the waterproofing into it. So now this series of pipes are in thermal contact with the structure, exposed to the sun, and we connected to a small heat exchanger with a fan and a pump. So this unit is drawing almost less than 30 watts of power, sorry, 300 watts of power. And when we did that demoing of this, that surface temperature above, this was done in the Jaipur, so where you have a very high ambient temperature, and you have a surface temperature in the demo house around 54.6 degrees centigrade. But because we had this grid of pipe working in which we were circulating water, this water would evaporate by natural, by the heat coming from the sun, come into the evaporator over there, but you get condensed again, go back into the pipe, evaporate, and the cycle will continue during the day. So it will not allow the structure to gain the heat, because this was the active heat barrier system our system was acting. And in the night time, it will allow it to run when the Jaipur ambient temperature is somewhere around in night time, around 14-15 degrees centigrade. It would cool this structure to its night bed temperature to become a heat sink and cool it further down. So the average response was that in summer condition, when the surface temperature was 54 degrees centigrade, where you could not walk back today, you had a lower temperature of around 29.3 degrees centigrade, which is a difference of around 25 degrees centigrade. And so we had a similar house next to it, almost similar kind. We took the reading over there. We found the surface temperature on the roof side 52.8, and in the room side below the slab around 45 degrees centigrade. You can see the difference, 7.5. So the slab thickness was only 300 mm in either case. Only in our case, we had a pipe buried and another waterproofing. So you find that even with such a low roof temperature, with just a fan, the client would feel comfortable. And it had a huge impact in the HVAC system design. So if they want an air conditioning system, it would be 75% lower in design, because my surface temperature from the slab is only 29 degrees centigrade, unlike the other room where it would be 45 degrees centigrade. So this is another methodology where you're using the radiant, the natural this. This is the Sheetal Minar. This is used in somewhere. If you are familiar with the CII tower in Hyderabad, the same technology is used. This was pioneered by my mentor, Mr. Surinder Shah. I'll just briefly discuss over here. Of course, the other earlier version of structure building was also done by Surinder Shah, and I took his liberty to share this this working with you all. So what happens in the Sheetal Minar is that during the night time, when again this is done in Hyderabad, where the summers are very dry, and the night time wet bulb is very low. So you at a night time you have the water sprayed from the Sheetal Minar, where you have a series of structure with a passage of cross passages for the air to flow through. And as the structure is moist through the water coming through, and air also evaporatively saturated, it cools the structure to almost its well-built temperature, around 16-17 degrees centigrade. So during the night, 10 hours, it cools the structure, and the structure comes to the, again, it's a very large mass, and it comes to almost around 16 degrees centigrade. Now, in the daytime, you stop the water spray, and you have this ambient fresh air coming in around 40 degrees centigrade. As it comes in contact with the structure, which is overnight cooled at around 16 to 18 degrees centigrade, it loses its energy. He comes down, the cool air comes down, but again, since there is no more vapor moisture here, it is only sensible cooling. The cool and dry air comes in, and it has then circulated into a naturally ventilated environment, open spaces and all that, or it can be in certain scenarios put it across to your as a part of treated fresh air unit to your HVAC system, reducing its load. Okay. So with this I end my presentation. I'm sorry I had to rush through some of the slides in written because I really went overboard. I wanted to have some time for some of our mutual interaction further.
Sir, it was very
What do you
wonderful presentation. It was wonderful presentation. You have covered almost all HVAC, all the basic things you have covered. Even you touch upon the sustainability and some innovative practices also. Compare that heritage building with the HVAC. Now nowadays the trend has come to increase the temperature. Government, that is, I think BE has instructed to manufacture around 24 degrees Celsius. No.
Absolutely. The initial design was around, we used to design for around 20 degrees centigrade, but now then it came 23. Now, though you design for 22, 23, but you put a remote of 24 or 25. So
correct.
When you put it for a higher temperature, definitely your compressor will work less and save more energy for you.
So what would happen, suppose if you said that around 27 degrees Celsius and outside temperature goes at night below, sometimes it goes below, no? In that case, how that machine works?
It will work more efficiently, it will cool more, but it will trip more because the condensation ratio has reduced. So in fact, its cooling capacity is increased. So it will trip more. But if you already have 27 degree outside, I would prefer to use natural ventilation, open the windows if it is available.
Okay.
Of course, with some net and all that, so that you don't have insects and mosquitoes coming in.
So it is better to open windows. Okay.
Absolutely. If you already have 27 degrees centigrade, I would feel fan and all that would be more comfortable rather than doing anything else.
True.
That's my level of comfort. But some people may still need air conditioning, and they may still. But then, of course, if your emissions are low, this will come down. Your air conditioning load will come down. Operation of air conditioning will come down.
Correct.
So I had to share one video with you. I promise that I'll do it. So of course, I'm not recommending anything here. This is one of the. Wait a minute, let me go to share. Is my screen visible?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can see it.
Yes. Oh, now it is gone.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the indirect evaporative cooling system that I was talking about. This is one company, they are doing it. Again, there are multiple other companies doing it. So please, I'm not supporting any company here. But since you wanted to have a better understanding of how this happens, I thought this video would give you more clarity. So I'll play this video over here. So it will give us an indication of how this system works. I normally use the only indirect part of it. I don't prefer to use the direct part of it because I don't like to add moisture because it adds to the additional moisture adds to the suffocation unit. So this is the heat exchanger I was talking about, and then there is subsequent pad for direct evaporative cooling. This has a counterflow heat exchanger. So one is for the supply air going through the system, and one is for the air coming from the bottom, which is then exhausted out. And in that exhaust stream, you have this spray of water saturating that air to its wet bulb temperature. I can assure you this noise is not from the video. This is how it happens. These are two counterflow systems, and this is where the heat exchanger happens. This air stream, which is going into our room, is only sensibly cool. It doesn't get any moisture at it. You have in the alternate passage, you have the exhaust stream going through. This exhaust fan sucks the exhaust air through. This air stream is first saturated to its wet bulb temperature, and then it passes to this exchanger where it cools this outside air coming in, and this is where the sensibility exchanger happens. Normal efficiency of these heat exchangers is around 60%. So where you have a difference of in a dry environment, you normally have around 15-degree difference between dry and wet bulb, even in a peak summer condition. And this will give you, if I say 60% efficiency, it will give around 7 to 8 degree temperature drop. It is a sizable drop considering this. In certain scenarios, this can be the only technology you may use for a well-ventilated space.
Can I ask a small clarification?
My pleasure.
In the sensible cooler also, sensible heat cooler also, there is water spraying is there.
Yes, it is, but it is in the exhaust stream, not in the supply stream, not in this stream, which is going to go in the room. It is going to be in the exhaust stream, which is sucking. This air stream is coming from below, it goes through the alternate passage, not from the passage in which the supply stream is moving, and it is discharge out.
Okay.
So it has a two air stream here. It is one stream. Is alternate channels are there. One is for the supply, one is for the exhaust stream.
Okay, no evaporative cooling in the first stage.
Not evaporative in the first stage, for the supply part, this part.
Understood. For
this
the
side
supply.
is first,
yes.
for the supply part, nothing over here.
Okay.
In the second stream, it will come, it will get saturated.
Yes, understood.
But normally for my application where I'm doing it, I don't use this because I don't like to add moisture. There's anything above 70, 60, 70%, I feel it leads to other issues like perspiration. Maybe if you are condensation in certain scenarios. Some people who have asthma problem may breathe a little heavy. So I normally avoid anything above 60-70% humidity.
Yeah, it leads to some condensation also.
Absolutely. So, but in sudden, well, let's say you have an open space. There is no problem because if everything is going to, it's a kind of a one-shoe system. Then you can use this. You may get in certain scenarios conditions, you may get temperature as low as around 20 to 23 degrees centigrade. You don't need after the second stage. You just flush this air out, give large amount of air quantity and flush it out. You may still feel comfortable in this.
Okay.
Certain scenarios.
And this video file is available in MP4 format?
I may request you can connect to your this vendor. He would be more than sufficient to provide you all the details. I can share this similarly, but it will not go through on this because of the exe file. It will not run through. So normal web transfer will not go through. I might have to put it on a link or something, and you will have to download.
Yeah,
but,
no problem.
You can contact the
HMX.
This video is almost around 10 years old, around 8 years old. When they first come with technology, I think they may have much better impression now.
Okay.
And this is not the only vendor, as I told you. There are 3-4 other vendors doing this kind of thing.
Yes. Our understanding has become wider now. Thanks very much for the excellent presentation today.
Hope I did justice to the faculty and to the team that was there. I was a little fast in the second section, but I thought I conveyed the point that was required.
Yes, sir,
I'm still open for any questions, if you queries any you may have.
Is there any question from participants?
It means only two things. I might have done very poor job and nobody's understood anything, or I've done a reasonably decent job and everybody has understood it. I will take the benefit of doubt and say I've done reasonably okay. But Dr. Koth, give me the genuine feedback that you may receive from the participants. So it will help me in improving my presentation skills for the future.
Yusuf, it was really very informative.
It was very, very useful, very informative. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you very much for patiently listening to me. Yeah. Yeah, somebody was talking, sorry.
So shall we, is there any question?
Mallikarjun.
Yes, yes, sir.
Oh, my pleasure. So
it was really very informative. In fact, very crisp and appropriate.
Okay, and anybody wants to have more detail on the natural cooling system, I would be very happy to share, and I can connect with you with my mentor, Mr. Sundar Shah, who would be more eager to talk to you on this.
How do you find application of WAM systems in Indian scenario?
I didn't get you, sorry, sir.
Yusuf, Mallikarjun again. How do you find application of WAM?
Application of?
WAM, vapor absorption method.
Vapor absorption, okay, WAM. I had did WAM analysis for one of my clients. It works well when you have a waste stream available with you. But if you're going to generate steam or heat for operating a WAM, it's never going to be viable. So if you have a waste stream, like you have if you have a power plant or something, and you anyway want to have you have a low pressure stream available, and you need to discharge it somewhere, it's a good application for a cooling system. Or if you have a solar energy available and your air conditioning needs are during that time and the solar energy can meet, I would definitely suggest it would be a good scenario to work with, because then your electric energy is only not even 10%. Only the pumping energy is what is electrical. But if
But what
somebody says,
stops,
yeah, please go ahead, sir.
hello? Yeah, what stops our Indian market in accepting VAM in spite of that kind of energy saving potential?
Yeah, because the first cost is prohibitive. These VAM chillers are definitely expensive with respect to the vapor combustion system. So so the payback period has to be effectively worked out. Second reason why people don't prefer to use VAM is they are not easy to maintain and operate. No, it requires a different level of expertise. Today, the information and the knowledge of the vapor combustion system is fairly decent in the industry. Even a layman would understand how the vapor combustion system works. When it comes to VAM, even people like us, I would say I would need 3-4 times of reading to exactly understand this. I did the reading 3 times to understand how VAM was before I made my presentation here. So this kind of, because we don't use it in a regular basis, one, and it requires, apart from a mechanical perspective, it requires understanding of chemical energy engineering also. Because a lot of absorption happens in this, and which is a little difficult to understand. One of the major reasons for not working is if your concentration levels go unbalanced, when there's a change in the load and all that, there's a lot of precipitation happening in the system. Precipitation in evaporator, and that can lose your refrigeration effect very drastically when that happens, and it may require a very elaborative corrective action. So this is another reason why this happens. But this is information around 3 years, 4 years old. I presume the current VAM manufacturer would have more robust control over that, and they would have overcome this situation now. But the first cost is there availability of waste steam, because you understand that if I require 1 kilowatt for a VAM for a vapor combustion system, I will need 3 kilowatt for generating the same amount of refrigerant effect in a vapor combustion system. So you require much higher energy. As long as it is a waste energy, it makes sense. But if it's a steam energy, it doesn't come. That's my perspective. And the analysis that I have done for one project around 5 to 6 years back. Hope I have responded to your query suitably.
Okay, thank you. That is good. Nice talking to you after a long time.
My pleasure listening to you too. And thank you for this. I'll connect to you in separate just to have a feedback from on my presentation skills. And I would look for critical comments. Okay.
Okay.